took care of my younger brother while our parents worked overseas, only to learn he was hiding a life-threatening secret from everyone, leaving me alone to protect him and face decisions that could either save or destroy our entire family. I was 29 when everything started falling apart, though if you'd asked me at the time, I would have said I had it all under control. My name is Evan. I'm sitting in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. I work from home doing graphic design stuff, nothing too elaborate, but it pays the bills. My parents have been working in Dubai for 6 years now. They departed when I was 23, shortly after my younger brother Liam's 17th birthday. It was reasonable then. Dad had lost his job, and Mom wasn't able to find anything paying sufficiently in our area. So the strategy was simple. They would go work abroad, send money home, and come back when Liam finished college. I was the one who stayed back to take care of him. I didn't care at first. Liam was my best friend growing up. He was quiet, always off in his own world, but there was this energy about him. He'd play guitar for hours, lose track of time, then come out of his room and tell me about this song he was writing. He used to say music made him feel alive. Back then, I figured he'd be something big. Perhaps that's why I didn't realize how weird things were becoming until it was too late. It began subtly. Missed calls, messages in the dead of night. He'd go out and return smelling of cigarettes, though he didn't smoke. He'd say he was just with his friends, that I was thinking too much. I wanted to believe him. I said to myself that he was just being a typical 20-year-old, but something felt off. His eyes were different, like he was keeping some secret that was eating away at him. I remember one night quite clearly. It was a Thursday in November, cold enough to make the windows steam up. I'd finished a project for a client and went into the kitchen to make instant noodles. Liam was sitting in the kitchen at the table, staring at nothing. His hands were trembling slightly, as though he was either cold or nervous. When I asked him what was wrong, he smiled, that not real sort of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said he was fine. I didn't push. I should have, but I didn't. A few weeks later, I found a bottle of prescription pills in his backpack. Somebody else's name was on the label. I looked it up online. It was for something awful, like chemotherapy awful. My stomach tightened. When I asked him about it, he froze, then joked it off. Said it was for a friend who couldn't afford refills. I wanted to believe that too, so I let it go. That was my biggest mistake. Liam started missing classes. His college called me once and questioned whether he was okay. I said he was just sick with the flu. I did not want my parents to worry, so I covered for him. I said to myself that I was watching out for him, being the good brother. But deep down, I knew there was something wrong. There were nights I would wake up and hear him coughing in the bathroom. Once I saw blood on a towel. He said it was from brushing too hard. I did not push the matter. I was scared of what I would have heard if I pushed too hard. I'd write my parents weekly and say everything was fine. Liam's doing well, I'd write. He's working really hard. I did not want them to feel guilty for being so far away. I did not want them to come back and discover the mess we'd both become. One evening, close to Christmas, I came across Liam sitting on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by pages of paper, lyrics, partially written songs, medical documents, and a letter entitled, Mom and Dad. He looked as if he'd been caught in the act of theft when he saw me. I asked him what it was all about, but he didn't answer. He just said, "Please, Evan, not now," and he crumpled up the papers and shoved them underneath his bed. I still remember the look in his eyes. Fear, exhaustion, maybe guilt. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no text. His phone was off. I called everybody. His friends, his professors, even his ex-girlfriend. No one knew where he was. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I called the police, but they said he wasn't officially missing yet because he was an adult. On the third night, around midnight, the phone rang. It was Liam. His voice was weak. He told me not to say anything to our parents, that he'd be home soon, and that everything would be okay. Then he put down the phone before I could say a word. That's when I realized that something was amiss. When he came back 3 days later, he had not eaten or slept, I could see. His color was pale, eyes sunken. He said he had been staying at a friend's house. I didn't ask any questions, not right then. But when he slept, I searched his bag again. This time, I found hospital wristbands, test reports, and a medical center folder that I had never seen. The words Stage 3 and diagnosis confirmed jumped out at me. My hands were shaking so much I could barely breathe. He'd been hiding cancer from us. My brother had cancer, and he'd hidden it from everyone. From me, from our parents, from all the people who loved him. And the worst part was, I had no idea how long he'd known. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the folder open on my lap, reading each word over and over again. The document stated he'd refused treatment on more than one occasion. It made no sense. Why would he not take the help? Why would he keep something like this from me? When he came out the next morning, I asked him why. I did not yell. I could not. I just wanted to know why. He was quiet for so long. Then he whispered, "Because I didn't want you to waste your life taking care of me." I couldn't even speak. I just stood there, trying to understand how the man I'd spent my entire life protecting had been protecting me all along. That morning changed everything. Nothing felt real after that morning. The house wasn't home. Every creak made me tense. Every cough Liam gave made my heart tighten. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head, that he didn't want me to spend my life taking care of him. I didn't know if I should be angry or devastated, maybe both. I wanted to scream at him, shake him, tell him I had a right to know, but I couldn't. He was brittle, like the wrong word would make him break. Liam was 23, too young to be carrying something like that by himself. I was 29, the older brother, the one who was supposed to have answers, but I didn't. I totally felt helpless for the first time in my life. I started reading up on his condition, looking into treatments, survival rates, side effects. None of it looked good. The hospital folder said stage 3 lymphoma and all that. It was not hopeless, but it was not good. I sat at the kitchen table that evening and wrote an email to my parents. I just kept staring at the screen, wondering what to say. I wrote, "Hi, Mom and Dad. Liam's been sick and I think you have to come home." Then I deleted it. I couldn't do it. They were 12-hour shifts 6,000 miles away, working. They had sacrificed everything to keep us going. If I told them now, they would drop everything and come home and it would all fall apart. We would lose everything they had worked for. Liam didn't want that, nor did I. So I promised myself that I'd fix it. I'd get him into treatment. I'd take care of him through until he was better. I'd do everything. But Liam didn't want treatment. He said doctors saw him as a number, not as a person. He'd had chemotherapy once already, secretly, and it had made him so sick he couldn't stand up. He said he would prefer to live his life on his own terms, for as long as it would last. We fought for days. He would lock himself in his room, and I would stand outside his door pleading with him to open it. I said he was being selfish. He said I was the one who was being selfish for not honoring his decision. There were moments when I wanted to call my parents anyway, but then I'd glance at him stretched on the couch, skin pale, hair thinning, eyes dull, and I couldn't do it. He was struggling enough as it was. By February, his health started to show. He lost weight. He'd sleep until noon, barely eat. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Lopez from next door came to ask if everything was okay. I lied, said he had a bad flu. She offered to bring soup. I thanked her and said he just needed rest. Lying became second nature. I lied to everyone, to our parents on the phone, to Liam's professors, even to myself. One evening, I came back from the grocery store and found him on the floor. He'd passed out by the kitchen sink. His lips were pale and he was breathing shallowly. I thought I'd lost him for a second. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly hold the phone. They took him to the emergency room in a rush. The doctor came out and told me Liam's blood count was dangerously low. They had to start treating him immediately. That's when I found out Liam had been skipping appointments for months. He'd stopped coming in for follow-ups, stopped filling prescriptions. He'd basically given up. The doctor said that if we didn't do something now, we might not have much time left. I sat in the waiting room, staring at the wall, trying to breathe. I couldn't call my parents. I couldn't even think. When Liam awoke, he looked at me and said, "You weren't supposed to call them." His voice was faint, but his eyes were piercing. He was referring to the doctors. He did not want to go back. I said it was no longer his choice. He had to fight. He said, "I already did. You just didn't see it." That devastated me. I became his caretaker over the next several weeks. I drove him to appointments, cooked dinner for him, stayed up all night to make sure he didn't get sick. I informed work I was taking a few days off, did not say why. My boss was understanding, said family comes first. No clue how far that word got around. There were good days too. There were days he would take his guitar and strum softly, the same old tunes he would compose when we were kids. There were moments he would crack jokes about his balding spots or tease me for cooking the same soup every night. But even in his smiles, I could see the pain behind them. I started keeping a journal at night, noting everything: his symptoms, his mood, my fears. It saved my sanity, but it also made me realize how much he'd deteriorated. He wasn't the carefree boy who'd stayed up all night composing songs till sunrise. He was spent, as if he'd already resigned to something I couldn't. One night, at about 2 a.m, he cried out for me. I ran into his room, and he was sitting up in bed, shaking. He said, "There's something I have to tell you, but you have to promise you won't say anything to Mom and Dad." His voice cracked in the middle. I nodded. He took a breath and said, "It's worse than you know." He told me the cancer had spread. It wasn't lymphoma anymore. It was in his lungs. The doctors had told him months ago, but he hadn't wanted to believe it. He said he didn't want anyone to watch him die. He didn't want me to lose everything trying to save him. I just sat there frozen. My hands were grasping the edge of the blanket. He turned and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Evan. I didn't want you to know like this." I couldn't hold it in any longer. I started to cry. Not loud, not filthy, simply silent tears that would not cease. He attempted to wipe them away, but he was shaking too violently. That night, for the very first time in my life, I prayed. I did not even know what I was praying for. A miracle, maybe, or forgiveness. The following morning, I knew I could not keep this secret any longer. The following morning of that confession, I sat in the kitchen staring at my phone for hours. My parents were still in Dubai, probably sleeping because of the time difference. I typed out a message to Mom, erased it. Typed again, erased again. I didn't know what words could possibly get them ready for this. I needed to save Liam's wants, but having him die in front of me while I made believe that everything was fine was unacceptable. Every time I looked at him, I saw the face of the boy who entered my room carrying his guitar, begging me to listen to some new work he had written. Now, I could only observe an individual whom I was slowly losing, and I didn't understand how to stop it. I called his doctor without consulting him. I needed to know what our options were. The doctor informed us they could try an aggressive regimen, but it would mean hospitalization, side effects, suffering. He informed us also it might prolong his life, not cure him. I hung up the phone feeling numb. Liam didn't want war. He wanted peace. But what kind of brother gets you to throw in the towel when there's the slightest glimmer of hope? I spent the rest of the day sitting in front of him on the couch. His breathing was shallow, irregular. I could count all of his ribs through his shirt. I thought about how Mom would always say to me, "You're the big brother, Evan. Take care of him." And I had. Always had. But this was different. This was do or die. I could not protect him from this. I had made up my mind by nightfall. I called my parents. My voice broke mid-call. I told them everything. The diagnosis, the lies, the hospital visits. They were silent on the other side. Then I heard my mom sobbing. Dad said nothing for so long before grumbling, "We'll go home." I tried to tell them they shouldn't, but they would not hear it. They vowed to catch the next flight. Liam found out and was furious. He was having trouble walking, but he stood in the living room, trembling, crying that I had betrayed him. I did not yell at him. I just stood there and took it. He informed me that I'd destroyed everything, that Mom and Dad would leave everything behind and come back, and that it'd be for nothing. I explained to him that I couldn't lie anymore. He stared at me for so long, then grumbled, "You just don't get it, do you?" He did not speak to me for 2 days. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. When my parents got here, they looked 10 years older than when I last saw them. Mom ran into Liam's arms and hugged him so tight I thought she would crush him. Dad didn't say a word. He put a hand on Liam's shoulder and nodded as if he was trying not to weep. Silence overtook the house afterwards. We all pretended things were normal, but the air was heavy with things none of us could say. Liam tried to act like it didn't matter. He smiled, cracked jokes, even played his guitar a little. But at night, I'd hear him in the bathroom throwing up or crying quietly. Mom would sit outside his room whispering prayers. Dad buried himself in work emails, pretending to stay busy. We were all breaking in our own way. Liam told us 7 days later that he wanted to stop treatment. He said he wanted to spend what time he had left at home. Mom would not hear of it. She begged, cried, screamed. But he stood firm. He said he was done with living in hospitals, done with being treated like a patient instead of a human being. Dad just sat there. I knew he was with Liam, even though he wouldn't tell him to his face. I couldn't lose him, so I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I called one of his doctors behind his back. I asked about clinical trials, experimental treatments, anything. The doctor informed me that there was one they offered in Seattle. Risky, expensive, but maybe worth it. I informed Liam the following day, hoping he'd finally see things my way. He did not. He responded, "You don't understand, Evan. I don't fear death. I fear you will not be alive when I die." That line struck me harder than anything else he had ever said. I could not even bring myself to gaze at him. He extended his hand and took mine, his own hand icily cold. He said, "Promise me something. Promise me you won't waste the rest of your life regretting something beyond your control." I couldn't react. Everything went sour the following week. He started coughing blood again. We got him into the hospital, and this time they informed us it was critical. His lungs were collapsing. Mom cried all the way to the hospital. Dad just stared out the window. I held on to Liam's hand in the back seat. He was barely conscious, saying something I couldn't quite decipher. The hospital admitted him as soon as we got there. The remainder of the next few days was a blur of machinery, nurses, and exhaustion. I slept in a chair beside his bed, holding his hand during the nights. Every now and again, he'd wake and ask me to play his favorite songs on his phone. He'd shut his eyes, hum along, and then sleep again. One night, he awoke and whispered, "Do you remember the treehouse we used to build when we were kids?" I nodded. He smiled faintly. "I wish I could see that again." That night, I drove back to our old house, parked outside the empty lot where the treehouse used to be, and sat there for hours. The wind was harsh, the street empty. I thought about how fragile it all was, how quickly life could turn from ordinary to catastrophe. I returned to the hospital at dawn, and the nurse told me he had a rough night. His oxygen levels were dropping. Mom sat next to his bed, holding his hand and praying softly. Dad was behind her, saying nothing, his tears welling up in his eyes. I drew near, and Liam turned to me. He smiled weakly and grunted, "You're still here." I said, "I'm not going anywhere." He closed his eyes and whispered, "Good." I did not want to do this alone. And then, for the first time, I understood what he meant. It wasn't dying alone that was important. It was to be seen, to be heard, to be loved even when everything breaks down. I sat up all night with him, keeping his hand in mine as he slept. I had no idea this was the last time he'd wake up. Liam passed away 2 days later. It was early morning, the kind of morning where the world is half awake. The hospital room machines were still beeping when the nurse entered and took his vital signs. She turned to us, whispered, "He's gone." Mom screamed. Dad was standing there in shock, and I just looked at him. His face was peaceful, like he'd just fallen asleep. For a moment, I expected him to wake up again, but he didn't. He never would. They left us by ourselves. Mom couldn't let go of his hand. She was just repeating over and over, "My boy, my sweet boy." Dad was praying under his breath, his voice trembling. I stood at the window, trying to get my breath. I couldn't cry. Not yet. It felt like my body was in shock. Like if I could just remain still enough, all of this would go away. When they took him away, Mom collapsed. Dad cradled her, and I went out into the hallway because I couldn't bear to see that. The nurse handed me a tiny clear bag with his stuff, his phone, his watch, a creased piece of paper with my name on it. I looked at it but couldn't open it. Not there, not yet. The funeral was small, immediate family, and a few of Liam's college friends. His closest friend, Marcus, spoke for a bit. He said how Liam was the kind of person who made you feel like you were there when he was dealing with his own problems. I stood beside the coffin, my throat tightening. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. Every word felt inadequate. That evening, after everyone had left, I finally opened the letter. It was written in Liam's messy handwriting with smudges where the ink had spread. "Evan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you things. I just didn't want my life to be your responsibility. You've always been the one who held everything together. You did more for me than anyone possibly could. Don't hate me for what I did. I've made peace with it. I hope you can someday. There's something I want you to do. In my top drawer, there's a notebook. It's full of songs I never finished. I want you to record them, even if it's only for you. They're all about you, about us, about growing up. You once said I'd be big. Maybe this is how I make that real, even if I won't be here to watch it. Take care of Mom and Dad. They'll need you. But don't forget to live your own life too. You've already spent too much of it caring for me. I love you always. Liam." I read that letter at least 100 times. The section with the songs was what hurt me the most. I went into his bedroom and opened the top drawer. The notebook was there, as he described. Inside it were pages of lyrics, chords, random notes, and half ideas. There were songs about our childhood, songs about being afraid to die young, and one just called Evan. I read it all night. For the first time, I cried, truly cried. Not quiet tears, but the kind that shake your whole body. It felt like all the guilt, anger, and sadness I'd been holding in finally broke loose. The next few weeks were a blur. Mom couldn't sleep. She'd sit on the couch and stare at the front door like he might walk through at any moment. Dad threw himself into work again, trying to avoid the silence. I started to record the songs, as Liam had asked me to. I was not a singer, but I nevertheless did my best. I wanted to hear his words said out loud, to keep him alive in some way through his songs. The single song, the one he'd named Evan, was unfinished. The last line stopped short in a sentence. "You're the reason I," and remained unfinished. I never found out what he meant to put there. Maybe he was out of time. Maybe he thought I'd understand without words. I uploaded the recordings to the internet a few months later under his name. No fancy promotion, no flashy cover art, just his voice, his words, his story. I didn't expect anyone to listen, but people did. They left comments about how his lyrics were personal, how it reminded them to reflect on their own loss. It was strange. His pain became something that helped others heal. Mom told me that listening to his songs made her feel closer to him. Dad told me that it helped him finally cry. For me, it was like I could breathe again after holding my breath too long. I still missed him every day. But it wasn't the same sort of pain anymore. It was quieter, softer. One evening, I found myself back at the treehouse spot where we would go, as he'd instructed before he died. The tree still stood, even taller than before, but the house was gone. I sat there for a bit, thinking about all of it. The fighting, the laughing, the secrets, the quiet. Something shifted in my brain that night. He hadn't hidden his sickness from me because he didn't trust me. He'd done it because he loved me too much to let me come apart while he was dying. That was the kind of person he was, always doing things for other people, even when they needed to be done for him. A year later, his songs were played at a local little show. Marcus had helped organize it. We'd called it Songs for Liam. I stood on stage and said a few words about him, not as a man who had lost a brother, but as a man who had been blessed enough to have had him at all. People laughed, people cried, and for the first time since his death, I was at peace. Life didn't somehow become easier after that. There are still mornings I wake up and forget he is dead and then remember, but there is comfort in the fact that his voice still lives, in his music, in us. I still have his notebook sitting on my desk. I go through it sometimes when I am stuck or when the world feels too much, and every time I read that fragmented line and whisper what I think he meant to write, "You're the reason I kept going."